So, one of the things that I have found that Christians really struggle to explain is slavery. And I think the reason they struggle to explain it is because they don't understand what God is doing. And honestly, I don't even think anyone understands what he's doing. And I was reading Genesis 15 and I have a theory. Now, I want to say, I don't know that this is like the whole explanation, but I think this is definitely part of it. So, one of the things that it's important to recognize is that a lot of the Bible is essentially this slap fight, this deed slap fight over the earth. Who has dominion? Who has power and authority? Adam and Eve originally had power and authority, and they accidentally gave it away by sinning. They didn't realize that's what they were doing. And so when they gave away the dominion and authority, they gave it away to the enemy, to Satan. And so Satan is temporarily like the prince of this world right now. He is the one who has dominion and power and authority. And that's why he was able to tempt Jesus in the wilderness with riches and a kingdom because he has those things to give. He is currently the one who is over the earth. And so he tries to replicate himself and he tries to do counterfeits of the kingdom of God. He wants to be like God, so he wants to be receiving worship, submission, obedience. He wants to subjugate people. He thinks that's what God is and what God does. And God doesn't actually do that. God gives mankind a lot of free will also. The more power and authority you have in God's kingdom, the more you are supposed to be serving those over whom you have power and authority. So, for example, Adam and Eve in the garden, which was the ideal, they don't have power and authority over each other. It is co equal. They work together in partnership. And the power and authority is over the animals, over the earth, over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and anything that walks or crawls on the land. God gives them every green growing thing for food. And so they have dominion and they're supposed to be using it to I don't want to say shepherd, but to take care of the earth and the creatures on the earth. Angels have a lot of power and authority, or have a lot of power, and they use that power in service of human beings. They're supposed to be helping human beings as if the hand of God. And so they're not using this power for their own benefit and will. The ones who tried were the ones who were fallen angels and who no longer are in the positions of authority that God had them in. They misuse their power and authority. So the dynamic that Satan sets up, that's the dis- distorted version of God's kingdom, is one in which he is a God king worshipped. People are essentially slaves to him. Whereas God doesn't want slaves. He wants people that are working with him in this, on this earth or spiritually or whatever. He's looking at a more partnership model, and one where if you have more power, knowledge, and authority, you are shepherding or taking care of the people below you. He's very particular about how power is used and the bounds of power. So when we see slavery on this earth, one, that is a replication of the enemy's idea of how things and power should work. And two, God takes it and essentially uses it to set people free. I need to read Genesis 15 because like this is the foundation for all of it. Okay. Genesis 15, 13 through 14. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. There's a judgment for keeping God's people in slavery. Oh, that's interesting, especially that 400-year number. That was very interesting to me because it made me think, wait a minute. How long was slavery like in America? Not necessarily America the country, but having been colonized, at what point did slavery start? And the first recorded instance of slavery, if I remember correctly, was 1619, which was a very interesting number to me because 400 years from 1619 is 2019. What started in 2019? The COVID pandemic. So suddenly I'm like, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I'm vaguely remembering Black Israelites who think they are the real Jews, the real Hebrews. I'm not particularly like very familiar with them. And I'd never really looked into them, but I know enough to know that they think that they're the real Jews, the real Hebrews, the real heirs of the promise of the covenant. And I was like, I could see why they might think that, especially if very soon the nation comes under judgment and there is uh a famine. So in the Bible it also talks about touch not my anointed ones. And if you do, there's a famine. And it's hold up. Psalm 105, 15 through 17, saying, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. And I was like, well, wouldn't it be interesting? Because my personal projections, I talk about this on my abuse channel, but I haven't talked about it here. My personal projection is that we enter into economic devastation and famine October 2026 through October 2027. So I am anticipating famine. So this whole thing like caught my attention. And it made me realize every time the Israelites take a slave into their home, that person often becomes an Israelite. Every time one of these Christians took a slave into their home, like in the American South, took a slave into their home and made them Christian, what were they doing? They were putting God's people in slavery, in affliction. And God has promises about what he's going to do as a result of that. He says, touch not my anointed ones. Well, if they've come into the promise, if they are now God's people, if they are co-heirs of the covenant, then putting them in slavery, putting them in bondage, replicating the kingdom of the enemy over these people, and then not setting them free, I think means you failed at being an Israelite or being a Christian. One of the things Jesus does is he is called a kinsman redeemer. There is a person within Jewish tradition, Jewish, like Old Testament Jewish tradition and law, where like, if someone was in some kind of bondage or if like a woman lost her husband or something like that, you could have a kinsman redeemer redeem you, spend money to set you free, to pay the bond, to free you, or to redeem your status, standing, reputation, or whatever. The whole story of Ruth and Boaz essentially is a kinsman redeemer, and Christians consider it a typology of Jesus in the future. So Jesus is very specifically a person who comes to set the captives free, to redeem people, to pay the bond of their sin, to pay whatever it is they owe. He did it on the cross. That's why Jesus, him being on the cross, had to be that he became a curse he became like a curse. Because by becoming the curse, that means he has paid for everyone because he was innocent. He was somebody who became a curse that did nothing. He was murdered. He was cursed. Accursed. So anyway, when God has given like directions to the Israelites about like, okay, well, if you take in a slave and you got to treat them this way and that way and whatever, here are the bounds of what you can do. Um, I I think the test for them is to recognize, oh, this person is now an Israel. They are part of my household. Now they have come under God's protection. They've, if they become Israelite, which they often had, just like many of the slaves became Christian, they're now God's people. Are you setting them free? Are you redeeming them? Or are you keeping them in bondage? Whose kingdom are you showing that you belong to? And I do think that not only are there national consequences, like from a nation perspective, there's a judgment. I think also on the people who are doing that activity, I think there's also a judgment on them. I know for me personally, I prayed for my entire family line for us because God's outside of time. So you can pray into the past, present, and future. I prayed that no one in my family line is ever involved in slavery, that we never benefit from the exploitation of other human beings. And that, I tried to do it in the most thorough way possible. But basically to make sure that my family, that we are not involved in that ever at all, period, point blank. I think that one of the reasons why the Israelites end up having to engage in circumcision is because of what Sarah did with Hagar, because circumcision shows up after she offers to Abraham her servant and says, well, okay, we need, God said we'll have a child and we need a child. So go ahead, take my servant Hagar and beget a child on her. And then after that, suddenly God's like, yeah, and circumcision. And not just you, but all throughout the line, all every Jewish person. And it seems like weird. Like, God, why would you want this? Jesus, because he's man and God, his blood is eternal. Once shed, it becomes a fixed point, I think, in space and time, like a singularity. But there's an ongoing sin from what happened because of Sarah and Hagar. And so God isn't giving the Jews instructions around circumcision because of that sin. And it's not explained that way. So this is, I'm just want to be clear, this is supposition on my part, just based on how I think God is approaching these issues. But Sarah, Hagar, because she is in slavery, all of her children that are born into slavery, which I didn't realize this until, hold on, until I read something in the New Testament. Okay, this is Galatians 4, 6 through 7, 26, 28, and 31. Because you are his sons, God sent the spirit of his son into our hearts, the spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. Now you, brothers and sisters, like Isaac, are children of promise. We are not children of the slave woman, but of the free woman. Children of Sarah, I guess, were born free, but children of Hagar were born as slaves. So those children were born as slaves into a slave system because of who is in control of the earthly realm. And because of that ongoing consequence of sin, there is an ongoing sacrificial offering of the blood. The other thing too that's really interesting is that in sort of these old historic religions, or not, it's hard to separate the religion from the legality. So the legal way that property used to be passed down was through the heirs, the eldest child, the eldest son. All the children didn't necessarily receive inheritance. It was usually the oldest son that would receive the inheritance. So that way there was no um you would keep wealth going from generation to generation. So one person would get the inheritance, and then the other children would either have to figure out something to do or get married off, or that person would have to take care of them. God did something very interesting with the Jews in Exodus. He commanded that they consecrate their firstborn sons, or their firstborn, sorry, I didn't say sons, their firstborn of not just the people, but also of the animals, consecrate them to him. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. I wonder why. It also sort of falls in line with that first fruits thing. Any increase that you get, you're supposed to give your first fruits back to God. Um, as appreciation, but also so that there's food in the house of the Lord. But I think with the human beings, there's something in the animals, there's something really specific about that. I think the reason why is that so God has established dominion over all of the ones who are receiving the inheritance, that he can have authority within his own rules, within his own utterances, within his own framework that he set up, within his own spiritual laws, that he has authority to to make decisions and move people. It's essentially the version of the Lord's Prayer, which Christians are supposed to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. We are saying out of our own authority, God, your authority be done. Jesus said this in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, um, take this cup from me, but if not, thy will be done. So God is doing some very interesting things in terms of gaining ground for his people, for his kingdom against the slave kingdom of the enemy. And the Israelites have a lot to answer for accidentally putting so many people into slavery, because Hagar's son Ishmael is the one who goes on to basically be the founding father of like the Middle East, Islam. So the promises for Abraham's children can also, some of them cross apply to Ishmael. And it's why we see this slap fight between these two major religions, Judaism and Islam. And then Christianity is kind of like coming behind as God like trying to make things right, in my opinion. So when you think about how slavery becomes God's Uno reverse, we're taking the people from the other tribes, the other nations, the people who are accidentally, unintentionally in the kingdom of the enemy, into the slave structure of the enemy, bringing them in as a slave to the Israelites, turning them into Israelites, but now they're part of the heirs of the promise. They are children of God. And how are we treating those children? Touch not my anointed ones. I think a lot of Israelites failed the test. I think a lot of Christians failed that test too. Anyway, I'm not saying this is a fully comprehensive explanation for slavery. I do also think that some of it is a rod and a staff for how God will, I don't want to say punish, but it's like, if you turn away from God, you lose covering and you end up going into the camp of the enemy as their slaves. Well, the reverse is supposed to be. You come into the camp of God as a slave, and I think they were supposed to set people free. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and yeah, I'll talk to you next time.